Frank leans in. As soon as I did a lick like that, he said, "You hear that thing talking to you?" I mean, I was hooked, man. I was like, it was like a big hook in my mouth. I mean, I was being like plucked out of the water. It was like, yeah, I do. And I don't know what that is, but I gotta have it.
Greetings and welcome to all my picky-fingered brothers and sisters out there. This is the Picky Fingers Podcast, the show for banjo players and banjo enthusiasts. I am your host, Keith Billik, and today's a really cool show. I'll talk more about it in just a second. But before I do need to recognize the supporters of today's show. First supporter is a gentleman named Jake Lowe. He's a performer and a teacher of banjo down in North Carolina. So if any of you are in that area and are in need of some lessons, look up Jake. He listens to this podcast, so you know he's pretty cool, right? The other supporter of today's show is Mike Muller. He lives out in the Bay Area. He's a relatively new banjo player, but he's picking up a lot of tips from the show, which I'm always thrilled to hear that people get useful information out of it. I mean, I know I like what I'm hearing, but it's nice to hear that some of you do too. Mike, I mentioned he's in the Bay Area. I've been seeing some photos recently of the smoke from the campfire. Mike, I hope you and your friends and your family, I hope you're all safe and be careful out there. That stuff is nuts. I'm kind of lucky to be in Michigan where we don't have any earthquakes or wildfires or anything to worry about. So yeah, I'm lucky in that way. Take care, Mike. But Mike and Jake, I really appreciate both of you guys supporting the show. I couldn't do it without you, and that's real important to me. For anyone else out there looking to support the podcast, I really encourage you to go to patreon.com/banjopodcast. That's a way to make a donation to the show if you do enjoy what you're hearing. This isn't my job. I do it on my spare time and at my own expense. So it really does help offset the costs that I incur from that and help pay me maybe a few cents an hour for the time that I spend on it. It is pretty hard work. It's very rewarding and I love doing it, but your donations do help a lot in that way. So patreon.com/banjopodcast is the way to do that. Other than that, the best ways to support are the word of mouth type of ways, which these days means spread links on social media, tell your friends, tell other banjo players that you might know. All those kind of methods really help a lot, and I do appreciate everyone who's doing that. Feel free to email me if you have any comments or suggestions about the show. I love hearing from you, and I do get a fair number of emails from you, and I do try to respond to each and every one. I love hearing your suggestions, and I am trying to incorporate them in as many ways as possible. The email address for the show is pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com, so email me anytime, and I will hope to hear from you that way. Speaking of emailing the show, one of the most common emails that I get from listeners is in the form of suggestions about future guests for the show. And that's great. It often makes me, it might be players that I don't know too much about, or maybe players that I do know about, but never really considered. So I love getting all of those and putting all those people back on my radar. But if I had to choose the most commonly suggested guest, it might be Mike Munford. So I'm really excited that I get to put out this show today with Mike Munford as the guest. And I have to say, although every single guest that I've had has been super great and generous with their time and has given great tips and advice and told great stories, this might be the best one. And I say that because, for one thing, Mike Munford is kind of one of these universally respected guys. A lot of people have their opinions about they like the progressive players or they only like the real traditional guys. And Mike Munford seems to be one of these guys who, no matter what your taste in banjo music is, chances are you dig the heck out of Mike Munford. He's a great player. He was recognized in 2013 as the IBMA Banjo Player of the Year. So he has gotten some recognition for that, but he's definitely a fan favorite. He's one of my favorites, and he's one of your favorites too, because I've read all those emails. For those of you unfamiliar with Mike's playing or his work, He's the banjo player for Frank Solivan and Dirty Kitchen, and they're a nationally touring group. So if you look up those guys, you can try to make a point to go see them. Mike is also a very in-demand banjo setup guy, and we talk a bit about that on the show. So you'll hear him discuss his setup techniques a bit. He's an authority on pre-war Gibson instruments. You'll hear him talk about that too. And probably the best part about this show is he does tons of demonstrating his favorite licks from JD Crowe and really talking about that style and why it influenced him so much. So I'm really geeked to have you hear it. This was one of my favorite ones to listen back to. I thought he did a great job, and I know you're going to like it too, especially because I get so many of those emails saying, well, you should get Mike Munford on the show. Well, here he is, the banjo player for Frank Solivan and Dirty Kitchen, Mike Munford. Enjoy.
Well, I grew up in Baltimore. I didn't really hear this music much as a kid, other than what most people heard maybe on TV once in a while, Beverly Hillbillies. I heard that theme. I remember liking it. Not enough to necessarily run right out and get a banjo, but I remember just hearing that and liking it. Mm-hmm. And then later on, a neighborhood friend of mine, when I was about 15, he started taking up the banjo and wanted me to come over to his house and see this banjo. I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. And nobody else in our neighborhood was really doing anything like that. And he started playing a little bit. He'd been playing maybe less than a year, and I didn't even know that. And he started playing a little bit of Cripple Creek, and I didn't know what that song was, but then he played Foggy Mountain Breakdown, and I said, I've definitely heard that. What is that? Mm-hmm. He said, told me all about it. It's bluegrass music. Earl Scruggs, the guy who played the theme of Beverly Hillbillies. I said, yeah, I've heard that stuff, and I've definitely heard Foggy Mountain Breakdown, maybe at Oriole games.
Or Bonnie and Clyde, something like that.
Well, I hadn't seen the movie yet.
Okay.
That movie came out when I was 10 or 9, and so I wasn't able to go to see a movie like that. So anyway, no, I didn't put together the Bonnie and Clyde thing at all, but probably had heard it on the radio again without knowing what it was. And then he played a track of all things, and it wasn't a Flatt and Scruggs cut. It was Earl Scruggs live at Kansas State. That's the album he had, Earl Scruggs Review. And he put that cut on a Foggy Mountain Breakdown. I said, yeah, I've heard that. God, I love that. You've got to show me how to do this. I mean, it really got me right between the ears.
So you weren't playing any instruments up till then?
Nothing. Okay. Absolutely nothing.
And how old did you say you were?
15.
Okay.
I'd heard some things I liked. My folks they liked classical music. They didn't play or participate in that, but they loved going to concerts, and I was exposed to classical music around the house. Older brother, it had pop and rock music around the house, so I was hearing things, and I would hear little snippets of things that I liked, but again, not enough to really go after it. And as far as I knew in my neighborhood, just a regular suburban Baltimore neighborhood, we didn't really have music in the neighborhood. Nobody else was, other than this kid a friend of mine up the street who started playing banjo, but there was no music around. I didn't see anybody playing piano or violin, or if anybody had a piano, it was for decoration in the house.
Yeah,
but there was nobody strumming a guitar, nobody playing a horn or anything like that. So I didn't have direct contact with live music until I saw this guy playing the banjo.
And you knew that was something that
it really did
had to do.
Strike me. And I reading stories about other people that seem to be hit a similar way, and maybe in other genres too, where you know it when you hear it. You just say, like Doyle Lawson said, I saw a quote that he had of something, it's not just something you want to do, it's something you have to do. Mm-hmm. It hits you that deeply. And that's the way I felt when I heard him play Foggy Mountain, my friend. I said, you have to show me how to do that. And I was at that age where you just go from one thing to another. You're into basketball, riding bikes, whatever you're into. Yeah. I thought, I'll do this for a month. And then on
here
to the
we
next
are,
thing.
However many years later.
That's 45 years ago.
Yeah, that's cool.
But it really was as simple as that. It just hit me. And then one thing led to another, took lessons from him.
And he was showing you primarily the Scruggs stuff is what you went to?
No, in fact, I asked him, I said, can you show me how to do this? And no, you're nowhere near ready for that. We'll start with the Pete Seeger book. And I'm telling you, I know it sounds awful to say, blasphemous almost, but I didn't know who any of these people were. Mm-hmm. I'd never heard the name Pete Seeger. I'd never heard of Bill Monroe, Jimmy Martin. Right. These were not household names.
I wouldn't have either at that age.
it didn't come up, and I wasn't exposed to any of this. So every name, everything about it was new.
Yeah.
Other than all I knew was it was some form of country music and it had a banjo, but I didn't know anything about tenor banjos, 5-string, nothing at all. It came in completely cold.
So what were the next influences that you discovered? Who were the players that you
Well,
were really
it was Earl
taking
Scruggs
with?
immediately.
Yeah.
So really going after that, after a few months of the Seeger book, eventually got the Scruggs book and started working on that. Because I remember the Seeger book was more, kind of strumming, like one without picks. That kind
More
of thing.
as a means to accompany a song,
Yeah,
as opposed
which is
to
fine. It was like a basic strum and all that, but it sounded like, at least it sounded like a banjo, and I was happy with that. But when it finally was able to get picks on and start playing a basic rhythm, and then this roll, the alternating thumb or square roll they call that.
Yep.
I thought, golly, that sounds like what I'm hearing on a record.
Start being musical real quick.
Yeah, but really trying to get that. But I had terrible technique. The guy who was showing me at first, he sort of eventually quit. And I was sort of on my own, and I didn't have any pictures, and I wasn't driving yet, so it wasn't like I could just go. I didn't know anything about festivals, didn't know where to go. So I had the worst possible right-hand technique. I had my palm on the head, my little finger on the bridge, fingers flying everywhere, really sloppy. I did that for about a year and a half.
Doing everything you could to just smush your tone into oblivion.
Just trying to, knowing nothing about tone, but just trying to play and get my fingers in the right place. It was on a harmony banjo. And it was about a year later when I finally, maybe 6 months later, Lester Flatt came to town.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know who Kenny Ingram was, but as it turned out, it was Kenny Ingram playing banjo. He was a fantastic banjo player, and that's the first time I actually saw somebody play.
Wow. And especially somebody of his
Somebody
caliber.
who's a professional banjo player. Here I'm trying to figure this stuff out and looking at little black and white pictures in a book, but here finally is somebody in the flesh playing.
It must have been really exciting.
It was, but I couldn't pick up anything. It's not like I could really learn a lot from that, but at least I had some idea of a visual on it. And then one thing led to another. An article came out in the Baltimore Sun newspaper article, and it meant about bluegrass, and it mentioned Bluegrass Unlimited magazine. I'd never heard of that. Called Burke, Virginia, got information, got Bluegrass Unlimited magazine. It comes through the mail slot, and it was like, good Lord, this is, from outer space practically. So there was a seldom seen on the cover, and I'm devouring all that. I'm listening to radio shows in D.C. WAMU had started up a few years before, so I was able to hear major contribution from WAMU 88.5 FM in D.C. had bluegrass, several hours a week.
Yeah.
So I was starting to get exposed to hearing bands like the Seldom Scene, Jimmy Martin, Flatt and Scruggs, all of that. So reading Bluegrass Unlimited, and it mentions a festival, Gettysburg. It's like, well, I know where that is. Other festivals, they were in, out of the way places, never heard of it. But okay, Gettysburg Bluegrass Festival. By then, I'd heard of JD Crowe. Had the which one was that? The Bluegrass Holiday album.
Okay.
Loved that album. Train 45. That's a tune that really got me.
Yeah.
And so I see its little black and white picture of J.D. Crowe. That's the only picture I'd seen of J.D. Crowe.
What he actually looks like, yeah.
Yeah, so I remember going to the Gettysburg Festival. I wanted to see J.D. Crowe, and, I get my ticket, and I park my car, and I just turned 16. I'd only been driving a month, so, just getting up there and making sure I don't get in an accident or anything.
Whole new world for you.
Whole new world. Didn't go with anybody, didn't know anybody there. It was like visiting another planet.
Right.
Just nothing similar to the life I had known before that. So, I get right in front of the stage, and they announce J.D. Crowe in the New South, and this guy comes out with long red hair. And I'm like, man, where's that guy who was in that picture? That doesn't look like the guy that was in that little black and white picture on the bluegrass. This is what I knew about the music, right? Absolutely nothing. I remember they came out on stage, and I thought, wow, I guess they have some other guy filling in for him. I guess he's not here.
But it was him.
It was him, because
funny.
he had this longish red hair that didn't look at all like that picture. And I didn't know till 3 songs in when Tony Rice introduced him.
Okay.
And things like that you just never forget. And
was that the famous the Rounder 44
no,
band?
this
is that
a
what you
year
said?
before. This is in August 17th, 1974, and I remember the time, date, and temperature, because that festival made a huge impression on me. First festival, first time exposed to hearing parking lot picking and just the whole vibe of a really good bluegrass festival. and I was really drawn to that band and the Seldom scene. I really enjoyed them. Jimmy Martin, Newgrass Revival was there. I didn't know anything about these other bands really, but I was really looking for JD, and that was like my second exposure to watching a really great banjo player in person. And I remember that had a profound effect. But I had been playing less than a year at that point, so it wasn't like I was picking up subtle details. I just was
knew that you
drawn
liked
to
it.
the sound, and first time being exposed to great singing like that.
Do you know what it is? Looking, I know you maybe weren't aware of it at the time, but looking back, what do you think it was about his playing that caught
Timing
you, or
and
Ben
phrasing.
Eldridge's playing?
Well, Ben Eldridge had all the really beautiful stuff on Rider, a lot of bluesy chromatics, which was sort of hitting then. I didn't know any of that then, but, the kind of things that Ben was playing, those kind of lines that you would hear on his improv on Rider, and their material was so beautiful. But the thing I was hearing in JD, and I was still struggling learning how to play Scruggs style, but what really drew me to Crowe was what I found out later. It was that his timing, his tone, of course, is magnificent, but the timing and phrasing. Yeah, just the way he would play tags with such authority and precision and accent. It such dynamics even within his roles and phrasing. It's not just like a da 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 da. It's got push and pull, ebb and flow.
There's a sophistication
by the way.
How he...
and what else to say about it? It's like everything you need and nothing that you don't need. And what I learned later on was the way he would play and leave certain notes out that just added to that sort of sense of syncopation and space. Little hesitations and things in the roll. Things that would come up, for example, in Old Home Place after the end of the break. Just that little hesitation right there that sounded different than Earl. Yeah. And it wasn't that it was a better than or anything like that, but it was different.
It was a little funkier.
A little funkier,
reason,
bluesier, as it turns out, on certain things. Other things that drew me to his playing, particularly on the Tony Rice guitar album, which came out about a year after I first saw these guys in 74, maybe early 75 or late 74, that album came out. And that album, this is Tony's first guitar album. This was recorded in Lexington, Kentucky with the New South at that time. And so that's JD and then Tony's brother Larry on mandolin, Bobby Sloan on the bass. Primarily guitar album, but it had standards. You had Doing My Time, Salt Creek, John Hardy, 9 Pound Hammer, Freeborn Man, Reuben. Tunes that you would hear at any jam session. Standard tunes with great guitar playing and mandolin, but the banjo is particularly good on this album. Yeah. And I remember being really drawn to that. His tone, phrasing, particular breaks, backup. I learned all about backup from that album, how to play a slow tune. They did Faded Love, and Crowe played a beautiful break on Faded Love. I really ate that album up, studied it a lot. Guitar playing, too, that came along later, got way into that as well. But the banjo playing in particular was really strong, a lot of subtleties. Still studying that thing. I'll go back and listen to a track on it, and I'll pick up like little accents and things he's doing on there. It's it's very rich.
Yeah, it's deep.
Yes, it is deep, and the more you get into it, the more you find and discover new things. But there's like this loping kind of rhythm that I hear with that era of the New South, and you hear it on live tapes as well. Sometimes it doesn't even come across on albums as much. But instead of like a really sort of like a constant, which is perfectly fine. There's certain tunes. There's this other subtle swirling kind of a rhythmic thing that goes on with that band. don't know how to describe it sometimes, but it's a different kind of a feel that, of course, tied in with the guitar very strongly and a specific mandolin chop.
Yeah, it had to do with Tony's rhythm.
Tony's rhythm was a big part of that.
It's like it almost gets lags in rhythm, but then catches back up all of a sudden, and it really can smack you across the face when that happens.
There's a live tape from the Holiday, and these guys played the Holiday in 4 or 5 nights a week back in the 70s, early 70s, and a buddy of mine in Baltimore who showed me a lot about Gibson banjos. He was a friend of JD's, a guy named Frank Sheff, very knowledgeable banjo aficionado. And he had a lot of these live tapes from that era and got me exposed to that. And I remember one cut in particular of Somehow Tonight. I'm not going to retune it. It was probably up in B flat or B maybe, but just playing it in G. But I just remember the way the banjo surged and pulled on this break.
That's really cool.
And that's without having a rhythm section around it, but there's just like this, as you said, it kind of pushes and lags back, pushes again. I mean, I'm doing my best to try to imitate it, but it's a really special sound that I find extremely intriguing about that era.
Banjo playing, bluegrass particularly, can become fairly cliche if you're not careful.
Yeah.
And just moving those little cliched licks into unexpected places can totally transform how the
and there was one in particular in
works.
That song that really got me, and it took me forever to figure it out, and I finally got a cassette recorder that could slow down to half speed. That thing was like solid gold to me. But it was pull-offs and hammers and things like that. Right after the D, just like a place like that you really wouldn't hear Scruggs play quite like that. It was just a different timing there, or even just at the end of a reverse roll thing, like that kind of thing. I couldn't figure that out at all. It's like, what is he doing there on Bugle Call Rag? That kind of thing. After just where that little pull was placed, I just remember just being driven crazy by that. I just loved that timing, phrasing, and where he placed things like that. He's loaded with that.
Yeah, he really is.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really hesitating to make you talk about anything other than JD Crowe's playing because I'm loving hearing you dissect it. Because
oh my gosh, I could get into that all
I
day.
need to go back and listen for all these things that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But how is your own playing progressing? Because at this point you have a pretty well-rounded style in terms of you do tons of melodics, you do tons of Crowe-esque influenced.
Yes, it's a combination
material.
of those two, really. And I'll tell you the thing that really got me into the blues melodic thing was hearing Bobby Thompson on a Dueling Banjos album. This is when Dueling Banjos was still raging. It was an Arthur Smith album, and it had Bobby Thompson on a couple of cuts on there. And I'd only started hearing things. Banjo Newsletter was starting to talk about blues chromatics, but I didn't really know what they were referencing and didn't really have much in the way of that. I didn't have the Newgrass Revival album yet, so I didn't hear Courtney yet. Doing all the improv on Lonesome Fiddle Blues, but there was a break that Bobby did on Dueling Banjos. I remember this break because it's the one that got me started wanting to play that style.
Okay,
and it's done with basically this guy Arthur Smith who wrote the song with Don Reno. He was playing it on tenor banjo, and then he has Bobby Thompson playing the 5-string break. And Thompson's break started out really straight. Straight. And he goes. Yeah. I'm going to play that cleaner because to do it justice, because this is what really got me. And actually, it was a lot slower than that. It was Now, I didn't get all of that right away, that's for sure. But hearing this the first time,
you knew that there was something different about
I
it.
loved that, and I had no idea where it was. There wasn't any book out yet. Trishka's book on melodic banjo was not out yet. Mm-hmm. So there was no, I was like, what is this? Where are these notes? It seems, very accessible and today, but it sure wasn't in 75 for me. So, finally articles were coming out in Banjo Newsletter referencing things like that, and you're starting to hear the, that kind of thing. Ben Eldridge was playing that on a song called Appalachian Train or Appalachian Rain on one of their seldom seen albums. So it was starting to show up more and more and starting to hear that, and that's what really turned me on to that style. Sorry to Bobby to mess up that break on you the first time. I haven't tried to play that break in a while, but that was a huge turning point for me because it was almost like a dual personality kind of a thing. It's like I really loved that, but it was such a departure from the Crowe Scruggs. Mm-hmm. So 1 minute I'm working on Flint Hill Special and really trying to get that. I really want that, but I'm also wanting to get. And it's like they couldn't be more completely different.
Well, I'll say you have achieved bridging some sort of gap because that's something about your melodic playing, and I think this is true of a lot of Alan Mundy's recordings, where you maintain a bluegrass drive, even though you're playing these non-bluegrass roll pattern oriented things. Do you have any advice for maintaining that type of...
and what a great... You just cited Alan, and that Hop Burrito Breakdown from the Country Gazette album was a perfect example of that, because he, starts off very Scruggsy. All that, right? And it goes into the C and the B flat and the A, D. And he has a great second break. Starts out again very Scruggsy. Something like that. Then he goes... Damn, that lick. When I heard that, I was like, oh my God. And it had every bit of the same drive. It was all, up-tempo, just coming out of all this up-the-neck classic Scruggs thing with Alan's twist on, and then that. Didn't sacrifice a thing. It was driving, totally fit what was going on. And that was a real ear turner for me, because I was already hearing people say, melodics just, kind of doesn't have drive or, kind of falls apart. And it can if you're not careful. And that was sort of the bad rap with it. It went two ways. In some ways, it got really excessive with people just throwing in blues melodic on, everything. Flat and Scruggs tunes, blues melodics. It doesn't sound so great sometimes. Or somebody playing sort of like kind of a lilting hornpipe feel or a lick where the song was really driving, and then suddenly it's kind of this lilting thing, and it falls off. And certainly Courtney Johnson, plenty of drive in his melodics. Mm-hmm. Ben Eldridge, no problem. Alan Mundy really proved that point too. So that it's not like there weren't examples of that. Carl Jackson played an amazing version of Orange Blossom Special solo banjo on the Bean Blossom album. I remember hearing that and going, oh my gosh, certainly no problem of a guy playing by himself.
I'm unfamiliar with that one.
The Bean Blossom, the original Bean Blossom album, Bill Monroe's Bean Blossom, it was a 2-album set recorded in 73.
A compilation of the festival?
Yeah, of the festival.
Okay.
It had, of course,
I've seen that,
Monroe, Jimmy Martin, I think Lester Flatt was on that too. And then there's this one cut of Carl Jackson playing Orange Blossom by himself, and tons of drive, big tempo, great ideas, and just incredible drive. I thought, well, certainly it's not lacking for drive. So there were already people who were certainly capable of this before I ever tried it.
you think that's just a matter of being aware?
Yes,
of that?
It's a certain awareness. And I think that the other thing that can really help with that, I was very lucky around Baltimore to play with wonderful fiddlers in Baltimore. John Glick in particular, Warren Blair, two fantastic fiddlers, really tied into the Baltimore scene, and got to hear them a lot. Eventually got to play gigs with these guys. Really great fiddlers. Warren had a lot of Kenny Baker material and could play that stuff great, and among many other things. John had that to some extent, but and more importantly, a really ferociously intense, bluesy, rhythmic feel in his playing. Tons of drive.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, okay, if you're playing a melodic phrase and you're hearing a fiddle play a melodic phrase with drive, why can't that be done on the banjo if you play it with the same attitude? Mm-hmm. So if you're playing just a G scale and just go, well, you can certainly play it like that. Or put more of a fiddle feel in it.
You can almost hear
you hear the bow
strokes.
Yeah. Even just doing a G scale. Put a little more of a hoedown, yada. Just thinking like a fiddle, being around fiddlers and hearing the way they do things like that. You're learning Blackberry Blossom as a banjo player, you'll tend to go. That's how I played it too.
Very even.
Very even and going
vanilla,
for that.
Yeah.
Listen to a fiddler. Yeah. Like hearing this guy John Glick play that, I could just think of phrases he would do, where he would just break it up and leave a note out. It'd be yabba-dup, ba-da-dup, ba-da-dup, ba-da-dup. Like just things like that. Just that made me think. Okay, there's a way to really bring more of a fiddle drive to the melodic thing and attitude. And strangely enough, even the Crowe thing, which seems very different. You can bring that attitude to your melodics, even though it's a different technique. Mm-hmm. If you're going to play, You Don't Know My Mind with that kind of... that kind of thing. Well, there's no reason why Now, I wouldn't choose to play melodics on You Don't Know My Mind, but if I was going to play a tune that had that kind of feel, I could probably get some of it in there.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's something like that where you're punchy. You're still playing that kind of a melodic phrase, but with, pull-offs, and then blending it in with conventional Scruggs Crowe type phrasing. Kind of repeating myself there, but you get sort of the idea.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I love those kind of quotes, and when I hear those kind of ideas from fiddlers and mandolin players, it's like, man, I want to get that.
Yeah,
I want some of those kind of phrases and accents mixed in with rolling bluegrass banjo technique. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hear a lot of that. Obviously, were you writing tunes back then?
No, not at all.
A lot of them your original tunes, you played one last night at the concert. I know you have another one. What is it called? Line Drive.
Yeah.
That use a lot of that stuff, but they're actually borderline more progressive in terms of arrangement, techniques. Where does that come from?
Well, again, a blend of that.
Yeah.
Well, for example, like Line Drive, that really came to me, just off the phrasing of a Scruggs lick. And that particular phrase is... Let's see. Sorry, let me check my tuning here quickly.
Take your time.
Got a little sharp on you here. Yeah, that little phrase right there. So it's not very Scruggsy, but it's starting with that sort of 2-3 hammer or slide. Obviously melodic there, and then going to a 7 chord. Those kind of
more
phrases.
Chromatic.
Yeah, a little more chromatic, but we've heard those phrases before too. But then the second part, not too far, not too far out. It's still kind of rolling technique and pull-offs. So that's the basic framework of the tune, but you can see it has still pull-offs and rolls.
Yeah.
This is the only thing that might be a little different. I love that kind of tonality, that sort of Mixolydian type phrasing and rolling, or phrasing, but that mode. Tunes like June Apple, those kind of fiddle tunes, Monroe's fiddle tunes, Old Ebenezer, Old Dangerfield, that have lots of that. I just love those that tonality, those kind of tunes.
That space between a major and a minor and a bluesy.
Major and a minor, the bluesy and the accenting, the punches, the fiddle type of ba-da-da-ba-da-ba-da, just like the kind of surge that fiddlers tend to put in there. And you can work into still getting sort of rolling and Scruggs type of, That's why line drive kind of came around like that. Just finding a phrase like that that's a little different. It's even almost Monroe-esque a little bit.
Yeah.
Right?
That major third. And
that.
And you even stuck in a little snippet of single string in there too, right? Did I?
Well, maybe
hear you go?
Maybe just
a couple
bit.
Notes, yeah.
I will use single string a little bit. I've never had the dexterity to really be able to do the long lines like Bela or Ryan and all the guys that are really nailing that style. It's an incredible style. For me, I stuck to the melodic style. I still wanted, for my own taste, I still wanted to hear the open strings ringing more. And that's not to denigrate the single string, because it's an incredibly versatile style. And that's not a knock on that at all. And these guys are playing it wonderfully. And there's no question that melodics has some, it'd be really tough to be able to really play flowing melodics in A flat. Yes. You could really work it out, but you'd be doing some really serious contortions with the left hand. It might send you to a physical therapy for the rest of your life. Yeah. It can be done. Pat Cloud was really a guy who, studied that and was doing some amazing things with that. But I think for fiddle tunes and bluegrass, I still wanted to hear the open ringing strings. I still want to get that. For me, I was able to sort of integrate that with the Scruggs rolls a little bit easier, and keep the tone relatively the same. Mm-hmm. So that it felt a little more natural to me.
I agree that single string just is tough to.
It's really
have it
tough.
Not be an abrupt change and to get up to speed properly.
Well, it is
for me anyway.
Me too. Like in little lines. I could do maybe a snippet of it, and I will use it in my melodic playing of one that I use a lot. It might be a phrase like that just for 2 notes. On the 3rd string. So there'll be like a little 2-note thing that I will use to get through a phrase or something. And it also adds a certain kind of a punch to it too. Yeah. I could pull it off. And sometimes I will use a pull-off instead of single string. But, the facility that it takes to really get single string up and running and smooth is remarkable. When you see the dexterity that a guy like Ryan Cavanaugh has, or any of the new crop of players that are really delving into that style. So I wouldn't dissuade anybody from getting into that for sure. And just for my purposes, I didn't need to really go that far into that. I still wanted to keep that kind of rolling, bluesy, rolling Scruggs Crowe approach overall for traditional things, and then melodic approaches for more contemporary influences.
Well, somehow all of that got you to your big award that you won a few years ago. Was that 2013?
2013, yeah.
You won the IBMA Banjo Player of the Year, which was fantastic. I guess I don't even know what to ask you about that other than what was that like? And,
huge honor and surprise. And I honestly, everybody says, didn't expect it. I really didn't. I had nothing prepared. I had no idea what I was going to say when I walked up there. Not a clue. JD Crowe was up for this thing, and everybody else, Sammy Sheeler, Ron Stewart. I mean, these guys are my heroes, And I thought, well, it's going to be JD. He's retiring or whatever, any number of things like that. But when they called my name, I was just the most shocked. And I still swear that I know there was a major recall demanded by almost every state in the country, but by the time I hit the stage. But no, but in all seriously,
I haven't heard of any voter fraud happening or Russian meddling.
That might have been the beginning of it right in there. But it was really an honor. I mean, a huge honor, and it was a surprise, and it was really, really touching, really. An incredible thing. And I don't see it. It's not like, it's just recognition. That was a really nice thing, because you do this for a long time, but there are plenty of people that need to be recognized, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't feel like that I deserve that any more than the next guy. I'll tell you that. I don't feel that way. But of course, it's a very nice honor.
That was
good
part
Lord,
of it.
There's tons of players all over the country in various parts of the country you've never heard of who are fantastic. In our area, Baltimore, Washington area, I was blessed to be in an area that had a lot of fantastic musicians living there, and some of them haven't really left the state. They're just glad to be playing locally or somewhat regionally, and they're incredible.
That was part of it for me. I thought you were well-deserving, but also in another sense, it was someone like yourself who had, as of that point, not been recognized that officially.
Yeah.
You had a lot of guys who had won it multiple times, and they deserved it
absolutely.
as well. But it was really refreshing to see.
And they're working for that. And not that they were working for the recognition, but I'll tell you this, I wasn't doing it for that.
Yeah.
I mean, quite honestly, playing bar gigs around Baltimore, did that for years. I learned how to play in gigs like that. And some of them were a little rough, but you just slog through it, but it's good training ground. And I'm not ashamed to say that I was, proud to be, a in the trenches, beating it out barroom musician.
Feel like you paid your dues.
But I really took it seriously. In other words, I didn't want to fall into the barroom lifestyle and have that take over and then the music just goes out the door, even on the crummiest night and rough crowd and bad sound and any number of negative circumstances. I really cared about trying to do what I was doing right. It wasn't always right, I'll tell you that, but it's like I really wanted to play as well as I could and right to the last set, to the last note, and be working on some new technique or trying to get a better break on a tune. I was like always thinking of that. That's all that mattered to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't thinking at all of, someday I'll play on the Opry or someday I'll be doing this or I'll record or whatever. All I cared about was hearing JD do something and wanting to get that.
Yep.
Or hearing, John Glick do an amazing thing on the fiddle, and I didn't know where those notes were, and I want to get that someday. I want to be able to figure that out and be able to execute that. That meant everything to me. That's my single goal was just to get a little closer to that prize. That was it.
Yeah, when the source of your motivation is internal like that, you will always be motivated to do it.
Yeah, and I can think
even
of...
when there's no one in the crowd or whatever.
When no one's in the crowd. I remember a good example of that. David Greer grew up in our area, Laurel, Maryland. I remember going to his house one time. his dad's place in Laurel, and David was just sitting on a couch, and I think he was maybe watching a Redskins game or something. And we were just hanging out. We weren't playing. I mean, he just had his guitar, and we were just sitting on the couch, and the sound was turned down, and he's sitting there playing amazing music. And then when there was a commercial on, got the sound down, suddenly he's just playing just beautiful music, just sitting there. I thought, man, that is what I want to do more than anything in life. Somehow get to the point, and I haven't gotten there, by the way, I'm not there where David is, because that's an extraordinary musician. But I thought, I'd rather do that more than anything in the world. Sit on a couch by myself, whether there's 1,000 people listening or nobody at all, just a cat sitting in the corner. Doesn't matter. If I could sit and play music like that, make music like that, that was just beautiful and pleasing to my ear, and really satisfying something deep in my soul. That was it.
Yeah, that's your bliss right there.
That was it. That's all that matters. And that's why, like, all these other things are, they're really nice and all that kind of thing, but it's like that was the ultimate thing. Unfortunately, you don't get paid to sit on your couch.
Oh, man.
Or to sit in your apartment, right?
Dang it.
But it's like, that would be the most amazing thing, just to be able to sit in a corner.
Yeah.
Or in a room or outside looking over a sunset somewhere or whatever, and just be playing something you want to hear and be able to execute it. And it doesn't have to be the fastest thing or flashiest thing, just music that really touches you. And if you could just get a little taste of that and be able to generate that yourself, so you don't have to go elsewhere and dig it out or search it or seek it out. You've already done all that groundwork of seeking it, finding it, tracking it down, trying to imitate it, play it, figure it out, all that kind of thing. And now it's in your grasp. Suddenly it's in your control a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like
those fleeting moments.
That's the deal. Yeah. That was like the only thing. And so that still gets me. I mean, when I get an instrument out, get my banjo out, and I just want to play, I'll just play rolls and licks and just phrases. Or I'll think of a really beautiful fiddle tune I want to get, dial in a little more. Or just listen for tone and just play a really beautiful tone. Or just listen to a string. And just get lost in tone.
I do that too.
I love D minor, right? I mean... just whatever that occurs to you.
That's a great mindset, I think.
Yeah. Anyway, that was still my motivation.
Yeah. Well, part of getting that beautiful sound is through your instruments, of course.
Yeah.
And you are pretty well known as, you're one of the pre-war junkie guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us about the banjo you have and what drew you to that sound?
Yeah. Well, it's a Style 75, a late 30s, early 40s. Hard to say what year it is. It was probably a PB 75 because the flathead. It's an original flathead pot. It was not a conversion, which would typically be archtop converted to flathead. Yeah. But now, of course, obviously a 5-string
neck. The
neck
is converted. Right?
I got it as a 5-string already, so it had already been converted from plectrum to 5-string. And I guess what drew me to that was, again, hearing Crowe all those years. Excuse me. And, I didn't know any of this early on, but later on reading about what banjos he's playing, and as more and more of that information came out about mahogany, nickel, and style 3s, and hell, back in the 70s, I'd never even heard of a 75. Mm-hmm. I'd started to hear about an RB3, and a lot of people thought Reno 3s were 75s. There was a lot of misinformation.
Okay.
This was still, kind of, trying to put all the pieces together. We didn't have the resources we have now.
Let alone trying to figure out those serial numbers.
Serial numbers that turned out to be not serial numbers. They're factory order numbers. That's a whole nother thing. And you can do all that research with Joe Spann's book about Gibson banjos and Jim Mills' book. If anybody wants to delve into that, those are two great resources on that. But that sound, I'll tell you, there is something that really hits you about that sound. And you could say that it's a lot of hype, and I can understand where someone would say, well, a banjo's a banjo, or you just don't really hear it. And I'm not sure if I really heard it early on too. But the first time I got a taste of one, I was playing another banjo, and it was a good new banjo in the 70s. And I went to this buddy's house, Frank Sheff, and he had a couple of old flatheads, and he had introduced me to, Crowe's music, the live tapes. He said, "Here, try this." And I'd been playing a few years and was in my first band, and I could play a little bit. And as soon as I hit it and played like a roll on a third string, I just did something like that, and I could feel it. I could feel the resonator like vibrating my stomach, and I could feel it in my leg, and feel the neck practically bouncing out of my hand when I did that. And all I did was something like, I can't remember exactly, this is 40 years ago in 78, something like that. And I remember Frank leans in. As soon as I did a lick like that, he said, "You hear that thing talking to you?"
It came to life.
I mean, I was hooked, man.
You did hear it.
It was like, it was like a big hook in my mouth. I mean, I was being like plucked out of the water. It was like, yeah, I do. And I don't know what that is, but I got to have it.
Yeah, there's no turning
it's like
back.
a taste of red meat. I mean, it's just like once somehow that sound gets in your ear. And it's so subtle because, there are a lot of great new banjos being made over the years, and probably more now than ever. And I'm not downing any of them. I think it's great. This is an incredible age for anybody getting into the banjo now, because the access to great instruments is better now than ever. But in the 70s, it was somewhat limited. Gibson wasn't making their best stuff then, and there were one or two things. And then some good ones were really coming along. Stelling was coming along. That was a great new instrument in the 70s. So things were really changing. And this isn't denigrating any of them, because they all have a great sound. But if for whatever reason you found that you got yourself hooked on a certain tone early on, it strikes you a certain way. And it really was not just hero worship. I mean, there was a little of that. You want your hero's banjo and all that kind of thing. But it goes beyond that, because if it was only a matter of that, but then you got it and you go, well, man, it looks like JD's banjo, but it really doesn't sound that way.
The novelty would wear off.
Novelty would wear out fast, and the price tag would wear off even faster.
Yeah.
So, there is something there, and then you have to realize too, it's technique also. And I'm not saying I'm drawing his tone, because nobody gets a sound out of a banjo like that guy, but all the banjo players get their unique tone with their touch.
Yep.
And I do feel like it's a 50-50. I do feel like it's obviously your right-hand technique and what you draw out of it. But you have to have an instrument that meets you halfway.
Yeah.
It's not all you, and it's not all instrument. It's always easy to say, yeah, Earl could pick up anything in a harmony banjo and sound great. Yeah, but
he would sound greater.
He didn't choose to play a harmony banjo the rest of his career. It was like there was a reason why his ear told him that Granada was really something. Or the JD was, listening for things. Or Bela, he had a 75. That's another guy who, really brought the 75 into awareness when he got his 75, probably about that same time in the late 70s.
So after all your experience with these classic instruments, the $80,000 question, I guess, is what do you think it is about them that captures that tone? If you're... everyone asks, is it the tone ring? Is it the rim? Is it the age of the resonator?
It's a combination of that, and there's so much. The questions I still have. What I would love to know is, what did it sound like new?
Yes.
If you could have gone back to 1940 and put a plastic head on and a Snuffy Smith bridge or something like that, and a set of GHS strings, would it have sounded pretty much like that right off the bench in 1940? My guess is I'll bet it was pretty close. Mm-hmm. Because when you hear, obviously, early recordings of Scruggs in the late 40s and early 50s, he's playing the Granada, and that banjo was only 15 years old then, almost 20 years old, so it wasn't even that old.
Yeah, exactly.
And by the time you're hearing, Reno's 75, that banjo was probably 10 or 12 years old. It sounded really good then, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, could it have aged in 10 years and gotten to that point? I don't know. So there's a lot of debate about that. Tone ring, rim, there is still something that mystique about it. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that they're all great. There are probably some that are better than others and all that, but there is something there. Amazing thing, too, is style ones that don't have a tone ring, but just a brass hoop and just a rim, they kind of have that tone also. It doesn't have the velocity. It doesn't have the carrying power for sure, but it's like got that little...
The resonance, something.
But there's something in the tone quality, and banjo players would make a deal about that fourth string and about the big fourth string, and of course we all love that. For some reason, I'm more sensitive to the third.
Interesting.
And the tone of a third string, I don't know what to tell you about this third string. But like an idiot, I could sit there and do that for about an hour and be very happy with that. There's something in there that is really hard to find elsewhere. And it could just be psyche. I don't know. But once you do hear that, it'll drive you nuts. It does drive. It becomes an obsession. But you have to be really careful with that. You don't want to go by somebody's say-so. If you don't hear it, don't feel bad because you don't hear it. There are plenty of things that other people hear that I don't hear. Mm-hmm. I just don't hear them. Yeah. If you get to go with somebody like Bela with an exceptional ear, he'll hear something and say, "Hey, do you hear this?" And he'll do something with a tailpiece or whatever. And frankly, no, I don't. Yeah. But I'm not doubting that he does. And
really good recording engineers are the same way.
Yeah.
Oh, your string's out of tune. No, it isn't.
Yeah. I don't have that kind of ear by any means. But the ear that I do have, I know what I like. Put it that way. And so I did get hooked on that sound. And then there were certain tones. For example, on that 44 album, the Rounder 44, on the very end of 10 Degrees and Getting Colder. It's in F, and the song goes to a G, and then at the end, JD goes, "It's 10 degrees," back to the last chorus, but he plays that C lick right there. Something about the tone of that lick that really stands out. I've used that as that's the litmus test, right? That's the thing.
Shoulder if you're going Milwaukee way. It's 10 degrees and getting colder down by Boulder Dam today.
If you could just sample that
put that
in a banjo.
Note. Oh my gosh. And so that particular lick, I mean, not that thousands of others of his aren't great, but that one stands out because it just really is prominent in the mix. And the tone is just so right, so beautiful. And that's I was chasing that. Yeah, for years, trying to get my banjo set up that way and trying different things, head tensions, and you can go on forever all about that. But to finally get an instrument that approached that.
So what is your, because you are well known for your setup skills too, what is your approach for getting that in terms of head tension? Do you have any secret tricks that...
I wouldn't say I have any secrets. I mean, these are things that a lot of people have arrived at these things. I read articles years ago. Tom McKinney, who was a great setup guy back in the 60s and 70s.
The capo guy?
The capo guy, but great banjo player, and he did a lot of work for Sonny Osborne. I guess he was friends of his, and maybe set up work for JD and Earl too. Mm-hmm. I'm not clear on that. But there was an article in Bluegrass Unlimited about him. And he talked about a few things, and he started talking about head tension. He didn't go into a lot of specifics, but he had some specs on that about head tension or a combination of things. And the first time I got to play JD's banjo, about maybe 20 years ago, and I started becoming aware of head tension. Up until then, I really wasn't tapping heads, and nobody was really talking about that. 40 years ago, it was just... tighten it up until it almost breaks and back it off. Yeah. There wasn't a lot of specific information. That whole G-sharp thing didn't really start coming in till the 90s, as I recall. Wow. Okay. Starting to hear people starting to talk about that, and Snuffy Smith was sort of passing that information on. He was doing a lot of work for Crowe and working on Rice's guitar, and he was a major setup guy. And of course his bridges and all that. So that a little more of that discussion was going on. And then noticing where people are setting their tailpieces, and then people are starting to get into bridges and gram weights. And I'm not up on that. I don't make bridges, but I've settled on Snuffy Smith style bridges and things like that. A lot of great bridges out there. I wouldn't.
What is that one that you have?
Well, this one is one that actually Bela gave me years ago. It's made by a guy named Brian Hooper, who I understand is not making bridges now.
Oh shucks!
But I'd like to find something like that. On this one, it sounds particularly good.
Is it just my eyes, or is it like a moon?
It's kind of like the Moon Bridge, but it's not a direct copy of a Moon Bridge.
It's much more subtle. It's
a slight little arch there, almost like a warped bridge, but it's for intonation.
Okay.
But I've had a snuffy on there. It sounded great.
Yep.
And there's so many of them out there. So again, I always hate to come across like, well, it's got to be this or that one's not good. It's the thing that can be really maddening about banjo setup and for banjo owners is unusual combinations could really work.
Yes.
And sometimes all the so-called quote-unquote right combinations doesn't work on yours.
Yours just
but if you take
likes a
that
different
bridge and put it on something else, it's killer. Yeah. Or a neck on one instrument is okay. On another one, it vibrates great. You know, that kind of stuff can really drive you,
it's a big machine.
To distraction. It is. So, but as far as general setup approach, if I'm looking for a balance, and which I'm looking for, a Scruggs Crowe sound, I would say I'd lean more toward. Where I want nice low. I want some thickness on the low end. And if I do something, kind of a quiet and mellow, if I want something like that, I can get nice voicings on low end and nice big fat fourth and voicings there. But it can still cut if I want. So I still want that too. So if I'm looking for that kind of sound, it does tend to be that G sharp kind of thing, or what I call a window of opportunity. Sorry about that. But somewhere between G and A is where that can show up.
Yeah.
Because for some banjos, you might have to take it down below G sharp. Some maybe between G sharp and A. Mm-hmm. Depending on your ear and your taste, and some instruments may need more or less, and it doesn't have to be on a given note. But that's the general range. A lot of today's players, like Bela and Noam, who are looking for a very different sound, a much mellower sound, they tend to be more like F or F sharp.
Right.
And if you're looking for that, that's, it's a little bit rounder sound, and it blends in beautifully for certain things. I find that for my purposes, since I'm not really playing that style anyway, that's probably not going to help me too much for me.
Yeah.
Because I still need to be able to play bluegrass. And if I'm playing Train 45 or something like that, I still need this.
Need a pop. Yeah.
I really need that sound right in there. So I find that this instrument will lose that if I get down much below G.
Sure.
So say again, personal preference and what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So head G sharp, tailpiece gap, roughly half the height of the bridge to start with. A little lower if you just need a little more snap, a little higher if you want it a little more open, but be careful with those adjustments. String gauge, I use GHS PF 155s. That's the custom light set.
Okay.
That's a 10, 11, 12 and a half, 20. They also have a PF 190. It's a cryogenic set, very good for tuning. 10, 11, 13, 20. Not too much tension on the coordinator rods. These are kind of known things. These are not just my things. These are things I've picked up from reading and talking with other setup guys about it. Yeah, fairly neutral, not a lot of stress. The top rod, when I say top rod, I'm thinking of the one closer to the head.
Closest to the head, right.
Should not be really tight into the shell too much, just maybe a little bit beyond finger tight. Little things like that do make a difference. On old banjos, you really want to have somebody check it out who knows them. If you feel like you have an old instrument that's really not delivering, and I had one for years that I felt like something wasn't right, check the tone ring fit.
Wow. Okay.
I had an instrument that for years really didn't have much of a fourth string. Good tone. It was a pre-war flathead, a Style 4. Good sounding banjo. The conventional wisdom 40 years ago was everything tight as possible. Tone ring, tight to the rim. This is what sort of the thought. But guys like Huber and others 20-some years ago started realizing that a little more loose fit was actually better. And when I told him I was kind of having trouble with this banjo, he said, he had worked on one very similar to that, took the ring off and trimmed the shell, just kind of scraped around the shell to loosen up that fit of the ring so it slipped on. Slip fit. I did that, put it together, bang, suddenly had a fourth string.
Amazing.
I mean, like immediately.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So things like that are like major little things. But that's getting deeper into setup issues on old instruments and fit and all that kind of thing. I mean, you could go on and on about that. But I mean, I run my action about 1/8 of an inch off the top of the 12th fret, with about maybe a 14,000th relief, forward relief. Very careful about the nut action. One thing I'm really, really super particular about is slotting of the bridge and the nut. They need to be angled. This is not anything new. People know about this, but a lot of people aren't really sure about it. That the angle of that slot should be almost the angle that it's going back toward the tailpiece or from the nut to the peg head. You don't want it going beyond that angle, or else you're not getting full contact with the nut. Yeah. And if you're going way less or flat through the nut or bridge, that's where the string can get a muffled sound. That's where a lot of times you'll get this sound. Like, here's a good first string. But if you get this, that kind of thing.
Or that sitar.
Well, sitar thing can happen too. But if you're getting that, but fretted, it's clean, but like it's that, then you know it's the nut. If it's still doing it fretted, then it's the bridge. Could be both.
Sure.
So first get one, so if it's still sounding like this, fretted, all right, then check the slot, the bridge, and if that starts sounding good at the bridge, and then the nut is still open, now you have to do it at the nut. So you have to check those things. Very important, because that you could be playing a really tremendous instrument, but you could have like basically low air pressure in one tire,
and it throws
suddenly
it all
the
off.
whole thing is not running right.
So the last couple things, I'm a microphone geek, as you can tell, and I'm a sound guy. So do you have microphone preferences that you use in the studio or live?
Well, I've used those, I guess, U87.
Yeah.
Sometimes we've used that, and what do they call the 404s, something?
414, probably?
414s.
Yeah.
I think we used those last time with recording with Frank Solivan at Compass Studios. We tried different things. Frank has a great ear for that stuff. Yeah. And, we tried a couple of pairs of different things, all of them high-quality mics, but I think we end up using a pair for that.
Stereo micing the banjo?
Stereo mic. Okay. I really love that.
Yeah.
There is a broader range, it seems, to come out with that.
A little more 3D.
Yeah. Live, I just have my own little Pro 37R that I'll use on gigs. We're plugged in now. Now I've got a mini flex in here, the Donnell Enterprises.
GHS product?
Well, not this one. No, this is a guy in California. It's called Mini Flex.
Oh.
Ken Donnell, and this is an older model Mini Flex, and it's basically a miniature condenser mic on a gooseneck.
Yeah, and that works really well for you.
Yeah, it does. It gives a very natural tone.
You don't find that you lose too much putting it internal as opposed to
not at all. Now,
great.
I know he does make one that has external and internal. But I like this one. This is an older model that really seems to have pretty good kick to it, good range. You have to be careful with feedback anytime you're using something like that, but we're not using stage monitors. We're using ear monitors, so that's not an issue.
That fixes a lot of
sometimes
problems.
In a very loud stage, I can run into problems, and I have to mute the banjo a little bit to get around that.
Mm-hmm. So last thing, tell people where they can find where you're playing or check you out.
Our band, Frank Solivan and Dirty Kitchen. That's Solivan, Frank Solivan and Dirty Kitchen. DirtyKitchenBand.com. Check our site. Our schedule, all of our information is on there. You can contact me I'm near Baltimore, about a half hour north of Baltimore in southern Pennsylvania. For anybody who's looking for setup work, who happens to be in that area, if you're coming through, I do it by appointment at home and can work around other people's schedules. I don't mind weekends, nights, anytime is good. I don't have a website, but just my email, my initials, 5ST, 5-string, MM5ST at AOL.com. I'm one of those, probably the last two people that has that.
Pre-war banjos and pre-war email addresses.
Yeah, pre-war.
That's how it goes.
Hope no more wars, but if that happens.
Yeah, knock on wood.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks for everything. I could listen to you talk about this stuff all day, so maybe catch up again sometime. I really appreciate you giving us your time and everything.
Glad to do it. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, you bet.
All right, take care.
So that's a wrap on this episode of the Picky Fingers podcast featuring Mike Munford, the 2013 IBMA Banjo Player of the Year and the current banjo player for Frank Solivan and Dirty Kitchen. Thanks a lot for joining me once again. Thanks a lot to Jake Lowe and Mike Muller for supporting this podcast. You can support the podcast by going to patreon.com/banjopodcast to make a donation to the show. Keep everything running smooth. You can email me at pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. Love hearing from you that way. If you don't follow me yet on all the social medias, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Instagrams, track me down. But until next time, everyone take care, and I will see you then.